This is from Ruth 2, from The Message by Eugene Peterson. It so happened that Naomi had a relative by marriage, a man prominent and rich, connected with the Elimelech family. His name was Boaz. One day, Ruth, the Moabite foreigner, said to Naomi, "I'm going to work. I'm going out to glean among the sheaves, following after some harvester who will treat me kindly." Naomi said, "Go ahead, dear daughter." And so she set out. She went and started gleaning in a field, following in the wake of the harvesters. Eventually, she ended up in the part of the field owned by Boaz, her father-in-law, Elimelech's relative. A little later, Boaz came out from Bethlehem, greeting his harvesters. "God be with you," they replied, "and God bless you." Boaz asked his young servant, who was the foreman over the farmhands, "Who is this young woman? Where did she come from?" The foreman said, "Why, that's the Moabite girl, the one who came with Naomi from the country of Moab. She asked permission. 'Let me glean,' she said, 'and gather among the sheaves following after your harvesters.' She's been at it steady ever since, from early morning until now, without so much as a break." Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Listen, my daughter, from now on, don't go to any other field to glean. Stay right here in this one, and stay close to my young women. Watch where they are harvesting and follow them. And don't worry about a thing. I've given orders to my servants not to harass you. When you get thirsty, feel free to go and drink from the water buckets that the servants have filled." She dropped to her knees, then bowed her face to the ground. "How does this happen that you should pick me out and treat me so kindly, me, a foreigner?" Boaz answered her, "I've heard all about you, heard about the way you treated your mother-in-law after the death of her husband, and how you left your father and mother in the land of your birth and have come to live among a bunch of total strangers. God rewards you well for what you've done, and with a generous bonus besides from God, to whom you've come seeking protection under his wings." She said, "Oh, sir, such grace, such kindness, I don't deserve it. You've touched my heart, treated me like one of your own, and I don't even belong here." At the lunch break, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, eat some bread, dip it in the wine." She joined the harvesters. Boaz passed the roasted grain to her. She ate her fill and even had some left over. When she got back to work, Boaz ordered his servants, "Let her glean where there's still plenty of grain on the ground. Make it easy for her. Better yet, pull up some of the good stuff out and leave it for her to glean. Give her special treatment." Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. When she threshed out what she had gathered, she ended up with a nearly full sack of barley. She gathered up her gleanings, went back to town, and showed her mother-in-law the results of her day's work. She also gave her the leftovers from her lunch. Naomi asked her, "So where did you glean today? Whose field? God bless whoever took such good care of you." Ruth told her mother-in-law, "The man with whom I work today, his name is Boaz." Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "Why, God bless that man. God hasn't quite walked out on us. After all, he still loves us in bad times as well as good." Naomi went on, "That man, Ruth, is in one of our circle of covenant redeemers, a close relative of ours." Ruth the Moabitess said, "Well, listen to this. He also told me, 'Stick with my workers until my harvesting is finished.'" Naomi said to Ruth, "That's wonderful, dear daughter. Do that. You'll be safe in the company of his young women, no danger of being raped in some stranger's field." So Ruth did it. She stuck close to Boaz's young women, gleaning the fields daily until both the barley and wheat harvesting were finished, and she continued living with her mother-in-law. This is the word of God. Thanks be to God.
So we heard the second chapter of the Book of Ruth. There are, of course, many different themes in that whole chapter. You can pick them probably as we were reading it. I will concentrate just on few, especially because our recent American elections confirmed to me and to many a serious spiritual diagnosis. It isn't primarily about electing this or that president or this or that congressperson or representatives. For me, those are just symptoms. Large swaths of our American society suffer agonizing spasms of dangerous solipsism. This chapter from the Book of Ruth brings to us an important and very timely message, I believe. But it is said in the context of ancient harvest and practice of gleaning, that is, gathering of those leftover ears of grain. And for us, in order to fully appreciate those transformative healing powers present in this text, you need to return and listen a little more to the Word of God. First, from the book of Leviticus. I'm reading from chapter 19. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Likewise, you shall not strip your vineyard bare, or gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the migrants. I am the Lord, your God. Like many of those laws, important laws, it is appended by this statement, I am the Lord, your God. And so that it is absolutely clear, it is also repeated in its own idioms. In Deuteronomy itself means repetition of the law. And I'm reading from Deuteronomy 24:19 and several more verses. You'll see it goes into more details to make sure and drive that home with us. When you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be left for the migrant, the orphan, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in your undertakings. When you beat your olive trees, do not strip what is left. It shall be for the migrant, the orphan, and the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, do not glean what is left. It shall be for the migrant, for the orphan, and for the widow. Remember that you were slaves in the land of Egypt. Therefore, I am commanding you to do this. And again, there is for emphasis, remember, and I am commanding to you to do this. And that I is indeed there in Hebrew. Again, for emphasis, it is the Lord speaking. Normally, in Hebrew, you don't need to have a personal pronoun who is speaking because it's present in the verb, like in some other languages. But here it is, I am the one who is commanding you. This practice of gathering of harvest from fields and orchards and vineyards predates the Hebrew Bible, frankly. We know that. And it is found around the world. And it was practiced until relatively recently. I remember being told Central European folk stories explaining similar practice of intentionally leaving behind sheaves on fields. Those stories explained it was done in order not to be cursed with bad luck, sometimes by poor neighbors, other times by wild animals, and sometimes by nature spirits. That practice is widespread among traditional farmers and cultures. It is truly worldwide. I know about it from Hawaii, where a farmer would not leave a little bit of its crop to a beetle, which then turned into a pest and scourge, and next time consumed entire harvest. So this practice of leaving behind, not stripping everything bare, not being 100% and more efficient, is very likely one form or another. This practice is as old as agriculture itself, considering that it is so widespread throughout the cultures which did not have contact with one another. The biblical version highlights the social reasons behind it. Leaving part of the harvest in the fields and orchards and vineyards was de facto an ancient form of social taxation. Redistribution of harvest from the wealthy farmers, landowners, to the landless, the poor, and those less fortunate. Just mention that in some parts of our society, redistribution of wealth, and you would be immediately accused of being a socialist or communist. And here you are having it in the Bible itself. Oh, how poorly they know and read their Bibles. Folk stories and folk practices often highlight environmental reasons. That's not present in the Bible or not in these readings. It is about greedy farmers who are not prepared to share the bounty of the land with the rest of the nature. And they end up with invasion of rodents or other pests into their barns, for instance. All this biblical and folk wisdom is, as I said, thousands and thousands of years old. And there is a wisdom behind it. Life is not a zero-sum game. Life is not a zero-sum game. Do you know what I mean by zero-sum game? That means that, either I have it or you have it, but there is no way in between. We cannot share, or there is not, my profit is your loss, or your profit is my loss. That kind of thinking, quite widespread. But that's not how life is. Life is not based on an economy of egotism and shortage. Either I have it or you have it, as I said, and nothing in between. That's not how life works. That's not how the universe works. While thousands of years of practices and rituals and legends and religious laws, for heaven's sake, in the Bible, they tell us there is a virtue and wisdom in sharing. Environmentalists and biologists now for at least a century highlight that as symbiosis, or symbiosis, I think it is pronounced here. Codependent living together. A web of life. Life is a non-zero-sum game. We can share and be all of us better off in the end. We need each other. Not a single person, no matter how wealthy, not a single person can survive on their own, no matter even what they delude themselves of thinking. Not a single organism can live outside of that intricate web of life. And the Word of God is telling us this is how the world was created. This is how God intended it to be. And we need to hear it, and we need to embrace it. Probably more than ever. Because our world is currently suffering, as I said, painful spasms of selfishness or egotism. You can observe it in many places around the world. But unfortunately, our nation can be a most obvious manifestation of this aberration. Majority of our compatriots, I mean those voting, of course, placed in a position of power, not just one, but the entire retinue of politicians who without slightest doubt perceive life as a zero-sum game. And we've already seen the results, even before they are inaugurated or take their office. You probably heard that argument or tension with Mexico and Canada based upon non-zero-sum thinking. Or zero-sum thinking, I mean. That there, either Canadians have it or we have it, and there is no way in between. Like diplomacy would be either or. It's never that way. Those people's creed is either or thinking. And driving force is an ideology of rabid egotism, unfortunately. But friends, we have a program. We are in a church. As Christians, we do have a program. We are to live out the Word of God. We are here in person and online, in the diaspora, and those who listen during the service and those who join us afterwards from recordings. We create an intentional community of mutual support and symbiosis. And we care not only for ourselves, but also for our neighbors near and far. And we care about other creatures and about the world. Yes, it might look like losing proposition, but it is not like that. Because we know about the transformative power of random acts of kindness. And we know that regardless of how it might look right now, we know that the underlying principle of the world, how God created it and continues creating it, is a life of symbiosis, life lived together, supporting one another in harmony. Of course, there are warning, grisly folk stories about what happens to farmers who are not prepared to share their harvest, about those who are driven by their ideology of selfishness and zero-sum games. And interestingly, you know what? Even Jesus told one such grisly story in the Gospel of Luke. You might remember that parable of the stupid landlord whose fields produced abundantly, and he spent all his rest of the life thinking how he is going to scheme the game for himself without sharing a single drop. And what happened to him? Bandits came and took his life. That is my reading. Superstitious people would like to have God being vindictive. I think that's not necessary in this world. If you sow this kind of mentality, the bandits will get you. But I want to lift up a positive message, especially now in Advent. Boaz generously shared his harvest with a migrant foreign Ruth, the Moabite. And I don't know whether you know this, it was repeated over and over and over. She titled herself that way. She was described that way. She was told that way in a sort of semi-approving way by Boaz himself. It's interesting. But without Boaz's generosity, friends, without this generosity of wealthy landlord, there would not be the Book of Ruth. Because there would be no story. Even if we take it as a story, if he behaved like a selfish guy, there'll be no story about what continues. And without that book, there would not be Christmas. There would not be nativity. Story as we know it, because, of course, Ruth and Boaz are at least legendary ancestors of Jesus. And Bethlehem, that's where it is happening, and where the nativity was placed at least partly for this story. Yes, Ruth's story is a legend, and Christmas stories of different kind, Matthew and Luke, are both legends, but they are intertwined and they reveal deep spiritual truths about life one more time. And especially on Christmas, I think there is a way for us to hear it. The way we live, we are writing future legends, friends. The way we live, we are writing ourselves those future legends. Now there is a question: how will the future remember us?